Welcome to Twilight Terror Stories. Twilight is not just the end of day, it's the beginning of something else. A time when the shadows stretch and fear takes its first breath. You've stepped into that moment now, and the stories are waiting. Let them find you. The percussive crack of stressed timber tore through the quiet, yanking me from the depths of sleep. A disorienting moment, dream or reality. Then came the voices, low and gravelly, urgency threading through them, voices utterly alien to this place, certainly not Clara's. In that instant, the idyllic sanctuary we'd sought curdled into something menacing. Clara and I had dreamt of this escape for what felt like an age. A week cocooned in a remote cabin, just the two of us. No digital tethers, no demanding pings, a deliberate disconnection from the relentless thrum of our lives. We'd unearthed this haven online, a rustic jewel tucked deep within forested folds, miles from any semblance of a town, looking like a forgotten watercolor. We'd arrived as Friday bled into evening, the sun already painting the undersides of the pines with farewell gold. The cabin itself surpassed expectation, rough-hewn but inviting, dominated by a hearth of river stones and windows framing endless woodland vistas. Unpacking, I remember the profound quiet settling over me, a stillness broken only by avian melodies and the sibilant sigh of wind through the evergreens. That inaugural evening unfolded with childlike wonder. We traced winding paths around the cabin, fingers interlaced, rediscovering a lightness lost to routine. As darkness seeped into the woods, we retreated to the fireside glow, a shared bottle of wine loosening tongues and laughter, echoing conversations buried beneath years of practicality. It felt utterly secluded, as though the world contained only us. A fragile illusion, soon to be shattered. The violation came our second night. Exhausted from a day spent navigating sun-dappled trails, we'd surrendered early to sleep. The precise hour remains elusive, lost somewhere in the post-midnight hush when the noise first intruded. Initially, my drowsy mind conjured images of heavy branches succumbing to gravity. But the subsequent murmurs, the unmistakable cadence of intrusion, sent ice water sluicing through my veins. "The bedroom," a harsh whisper commanded. "Keep it quiet." My hand found Clara's shoulder, a gentle nudge accompanied by a finger pressed firmly to my lips. Her eyes flew open, mirroring the terror blooming in my own chest as the soft thud of footsteps neared our door. A silent gesture urged her beneath the heavy bed frame. I flattened myself against the wall behind the door, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs, convinced its frantic rhythm alone would betray us. Slowly, agonizingly, the door groaned inward. I held my breath, every sinew coiled tight. A silhouette filled the doorway, tall, imposing, cradling the unmistakable shape of a shotgun. Thought evaporated, replaced by raw instinct. With every ounce of strength, I hurled the heavy pine door into him. A grunt of pained surprise escaped him as he staggered, the weapon skittering across the floorboards with a sickening clatter. I lunged, my hand closing over the unforgiving cold of the barrel just as he fought for footing. We became a tangle of limbs, a desperate scramble for dominance across the rough-hewn floor. "What the hell's happening?" A voice boomed from the main room. "Silas, you all right?" With a final surge of adrenaline, I wrenched the shotgun free, scrambling upright, leveling it at my assailant. He froze, hands instinctively rising. "Don't move," I rasped, the words trembling despite my effort. "Clara, get out, now, we're leaving." She emerged from beneath the bed, a ghost pale with fear. Footsteps, heavier now, purposeful, echoed from the cabin's central space. The other intruders were closing in. "Listen," Silas pleaded, his voice low, strained. "You don't get it. We're not looking to hurt anyone, just need a place. Lay low." "Shut up," I barked, the shotgun wavering slightly. "Clara, phones, keys, nightstand, go." But as she reached, the bedroom door slammed open once more. 2 figures spilled into the room, both armed. My weapon swung towards them, finger tightening reflexively on the trigger. "Whoa, hold on," one shouted, hands raised placatingly. "Easy, friend. Everybody just take a breath." The air crackled, thick with tension. Me, clutching the shotgun. Clara, a trembling shield behind me, and 3 menacing figures blocking our path to freedom. Sweat beaded on my brow, my arm beginning to ache under the unfamiliar weight of the gun. "Look," stated the man who radiated authority, presumably the leader. "No trouble wanted. We've got a situation. Need to vanish for a day, maybe 2. You let us stay, keep your mouths shut, everybody walks away. Simple." A harsh bark of laughter escaped me. "You shatter our door, invade our refuge armed to the teeth, and expect cooperation? Who in God's name are you?" The leader exhaled, a weary sound, lowering his own weapon marginally. "You really need the details. Fine. Bank job, town nearby. Didn't go clean. Need the heat to die down. That's the long and short of it." My thoughts fractured. Bank robbers? Actual, fleeing bank robbers holding us captive? This wasn't real. It couldn't be. "Please." Clara's voice was a threadbare whisper behind me. "Let us go. We won't say a word. I promise." He shook his head, a gesture devoid of malice but firm. "Can't risk it. Too much chance you run screaming to the law. But look, we're not monsters. You 2 stay put, stay quiet. This blows over before you know it." The calculation was stark, brutal. Even with the shotgun, we were cornered, outnumbered. Slowly, deliberately, I lowered the weapon. "Smart," the leader nodded. "Now, let's relocate to the living room. Silas, tie him up. Not too tight." The ensuing hours dissolved into a surreal tableau. Clara and I, wrists bound behind us on the worn sofa, became unwilling spectators as these men colonized our temporary sanctuary. They plundered our carefully packed provisions, devoured our food, drank our wine, their low-voiced arguments revealing fraying nerves and shifting plans. Their names surfaced through the tense exchanges. Besides Silas, there was Marcus, the clear leader, and Leo, the youngest, visibly ill at ease. Their anxiety was palpable. The robbery, I gleaned, had been far from seamless. Whispers of someone shot, of an exploding dye pack staining the loot, painted a grim picture. As dawn bled gray light through the tall windows, casting elongated dancing shadows, the kernel of a plan began to form. Leo, the young one, his discomfort was a tangible thing. He kept stealing glances our way, guilt etched onto his features. If I could isolate him, perhaps appeal to whatever conscience remained. The opportunity arose mid-morning. Marcus and Silas stepped outside, ostensibly to scout the perimeter, leaving Leo as our reluctant guard. The moment the door clicked shut, I pitched my voice low, calm. "Hey, Leo, you don't seem cut from the same cloth as them. How'd you end up in this mess?" He jumped, eyes wide, startled. I needed the cash. Marcus said, "Easy score." Didn't know. His voice trailed off. "It's not too late." I pressed gently. "Help us walk out of here. We tell the police you were coerced, that you helped us. You could still have a life after this." Conflict warred visibly in his gaze. He gnawed nervously at his lower lip. For a heartbeat, I thought I'd reached him. Then the cabin door swung open, Marcus striding back inside, his presence instantly extinguishing any flicker of rebellion in Leo. He shut down completely. The day stretched, taut and endless. Bathroom excursions were permitted, always under vigilant watch. Water was offered, alongside a handful of stale crackers. The robbers' arguments escalated, their nerves stretched thin as they debated escape routes, rendezvous points, talk of a boat, an exit from the country. Night fell again, thick and suffocating, extinguishing my fragile hope. Who would even know we were missing? We'd broadcast our week of blissful disconnection. By the time alarm bells rang, it could be catastrophically late. Then, deep in the second night, a sound pierced the oppressive quiet. The distant, rising keen of police sirens. Every figure in the room froze, raw panic flashing across the robbers' faces. How the hell? Marcus snarled, snatching up his gun. "Leo, you little bastard, did you call someone?" Leo shook his head violently, hands fluttering. "No, boss, I swear I didn't do anything." Amidst their panicked accusations, my eyes met Clara's. A minuscule nod, almost imperceptible, passed between us. Understanding dawned. Earlier, during a moment of distraction, she'd managed it. The emergency SOS on her smartwatch. Help, improbable as it seemed, was converging on our stolen sanctuary. Chaos erupted. Marcus and Silas scrambled, grabbing weapons, stuffing cash into bags, eyes darting towards the exits. Leo stood rooted, paralyzed by indecision. Louder now, the sirens wailed, closing in. In the frantic shuffle, I saw my chance. Twisting against the ropes, ignoring the burn, I worked my hands free. The instant they were loose, I lunged, snatching up the shotgun they'd carelessly leaned against the wall. "Nobody move!" The command ripped from my throat as I swung the weapon towards them. Silence descended again, heavy, absolute. Then Marcus raised his pistol, aiming squarely at my chest. I saw his knuckle whiten on the trigger, squeezed my eyes shut, bracing for the impact, the end. The gunshot roared, deafening within the confined space, but the searing pain I anticipated never came. My eyes snapped open. Marcus lay sprawled on the floorboards, clutching a bleeding shoulder. Above him stood Leo, a small, shaken pistol gripped in his white-knuckled hand. "Couldn't," Leo choked out, the words fractured. "Couldn't let him kill you." The aftermath was a maelstrom of flashing lights and shouted commands as police flooded the cabin. Clara and I were guided outside, wrapped in coarse blankets, fussed over by paramedics. As the adrenaline tide receded, violent tremors seized my body. In the days that followed, the narrative was pieced together through endless police statements. The bank robbery had indeed gone awry, a guard wounded, thankfully recovering. Leo's confession, corroborated by our testimony, earned him a measure of leniency his accomplices wouldn't receive. We returned home, Clara and I, but the veneer of normalcy felt thin, brittle. Loud noises made us flinch. Sleep offered little respite. Yet, paradoxically, the shared trauma forged a new, unshakable bond between us. We had stared into the abyss together and somehow emerged. We never returned to that cabin, never sought out that particular brand of quiet again. But sometimes, wrapped in the mundane peace of our own home, our eyes meet, and the unspoken memory hangs heavy in the air. The memory of how swiftly sanctuary can become a cage, how fragile the boundary between safety and peril truly is. And we hold each other closer, treasuring the simple stillness, acutely aware that everything can irrevocably change in the space of a single, stolen breath. "3 a.m. finds me anchored to this kitchen chair, the grain of a baseball bat smooth under my palm, listening to the impossible ascent repeat itself on the staircase. Footfalls where no feet should tread, mounting night after night, gaining resonance, proximity. And now the whispers weave through the creaks. This particular haunting began subtly, masked by the clamor of home improvement 3 weeks prior. Clara and I, finally tackling the deferred dreams for our 1940s colonial, envisioned space, light, modernity. The children, Leo and Maya, needed room to grow. The house itself yearned for renewal. Our savings were earmarked for a gutted second floor, an essential new bathroom, the attic's transformation into a true bedroom for Leo, a project defined by blueprints and budgets. Week 1 unfolded in predictable destruction. Contractors tore the upstairs back to skeletal studs. A landscape of demolition reigned. Ubiquitous dust, spectral shrouds of plastic sheeting, the raw anatomy of the house exposed. Life rearranged itself. The children exiled to the finished basement. Leo claiming the pull-out sofa. Maya the inflatable mattress. Clara and I occupied the ground floor guest room. Then, the first intrusion. 2 a.m., a call of nature pulling me from sleep. Crossing the hall, past the shadowed stairwell leading upwards, I registered it. The unmistakable punctuation of footfalls on bare wood, measured, unhurried, creak, 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 ascending. My immediate suspicion snagged on Leo, despite stern warnings about the hazardous zone above. I slapped the switch, flooding the stairwell with harsh light, poised to reprimand. Silence fell instantly. I climbed halfway, scanning the exposed treads. Only construction detritus, sawdust, and the slight flutter of plastic agitated by the furnace vent. Below, in the basement, both children were deeply asleep. Clara, too, undisturbed in our temporary room. An old structure groaning under duress, I reasoned. These timbers settle, warp, complain, especially when their equilibrium is disrupted by renovation. My world is built on ledgers and logic, columns that must balance. There exists always a rational explanation. The following night, it recurred, nearer 3 a.m., the same deliberate climb, step by step, but overlaid now, a different texture, whispers, a plurality of voices hushed, their words just beyond the threshold of comprehension, yet carrying the undeniable cadence of quiet conference. Again, the light extinguished the sound. Again, the household slept oblivious. I began a ledger of my own, a notebook charting time's phenomena. Night 3, the spectral ascent reached the 8th stair before ceasing. Night 4, the 10th. The murmurings intensified, still frustratingly indistinct, the auditory equivalent of shapes glimpsed through frosted glass. The rhythm of discourse clear, the substance lost. By that first week's close, sleep had become a fragmented memory. A motion-activated camera, mounted strategically on the landing, yielded nothing. Its digital eye captured only dancing dust motes, the occasional undulation of plastic sheeting and unseen currents. Yet the footsteps climbed ever higher. The voices swelled fractionally louder. Clara observed my deepening fatigue. "You look hollowed out," she remarked over coffee. "Is the budget getting to you?" How could I articulate it? Confess to my pragmatic, grounded wife that phantom sounds were unraveling my nights? That I now spent the pre-dawn hours armed with ash wood, eavesdropping on the invisible? I mumbled about work pressures, escalated my caffeine intake. Each night, I resumed my vigil in the kitchen. The footsteps never failed to arrive. Week 2 saw them crest the summit of the stairs. The voices, meanwhile, sharpened. Fragments pierced the veil. "Careful here. Almost there. Help them up." Utterly mundane directives, conversational, as if unseen persons aided each other in the gloom. No malice, no spectral wail, just this unnerving normalcy that somehow amplified the dread. I delved into the property's lineage. County archives offered only prosaic transitions. Built 1947, the Ashworths, a young family. Sold 1963 to the Brennans, then the Larkins in 85. We'd acquired it from the Larkin estate in 2019. No documented tragedies, no untimely ends within these walls. Just an ordinary house, passing through ordinary hands. Yet the climb persisted, the conversation continued, and now the light switch held less authority. Sometimes the sounds lingered. Last night pushed the boundaries further. My customary kitchen watch began, 3:17 a.m., my notebook attested. The initial creak, the second, the familiar susurrus unfurled. "Watch your step here. The nail's sticking up. give me your hand." The bat felt slick in my grip, my own pulse a frantic counterpoint. Clarity had arrived. Multiple voices, male and female, young and old, woven into that same helpful, commonplace tapestry. The footfalls reached the 8th step, then a shift. A new voice, thin, juvenile. "Why do we have to go up there?" An older reply, gentle yet absolute. "You know why. We all have to. Just a few more steps." Simultaneously, a chill permeated the air. The kitchen thermostat read a steady 70 centigrade, yet my breath plumed visibly. 12th step, 13th, 14th. Another voice, this one aged, trembling. I can't do this again. You must, we all must. Every night until..." The sentence dissolved unfinished. They reached the top, and this time, crucially, they did not halt. I heard them traverse the second-floor landing, a shuffling congress moving through the debris. Instinct propelled me before thought could intervene. Flashlight seized, bat raised, I charged the stairs. The light beam sliced through hanging plastic, animating chaotic shadows. The sounds moved unerringly toward the attic access, distinct on the bare plywood underfoot. Then I saw them, imprinting in the settled dust. Not simultaneously, but sequentially. Footprints resolving out of nothingness, as if tracing invisible progress. Diminutive outline beside heavy work boot treads, the narrow shapes of women's shoes, all converging on the attic stairs. I followed. What alternative remained? Weeks I'd spent as auditor to this phenomenon. Revelation felt compulsory. The attic access was rudimentary, a mere wooden ladder angled against the opening. The footprints marched directly to its base and ceased. The voices enveloped me, immediate, as if the speakers flanked me in the darkness. Time to go up. Don't be afraid. We all have to. Every night until it's done. Until they're all up. The ladder groaned, a slight shifting sound, not from my weight, for I stood frozen below. Something unseen was ascending. Dust stirred on the rungs. That fractured my resolve. I fled. Downstairs, back to the kitchen's dubious sanctuary, back to the chair, the notebook, hands betraying the tremor within. It's 4:45 a.m. now. The nocturnal activity has subsided, but its return is foregone. They always return, and they're ranging further, leaving the staircase, infiltrating the house, drawing nearer. Clara's concern intensifies. The contractors remark on my pallor. Leo complains of unsettling noises that steal his sleep. Even Maya, typically impervious, speaks of hearing people talking in the night. I ought to tell Clara everything, unveil the notebook with its meticulous mad log, show her the camera footage where dust eddies mimic footfalls. But the fear of disbelief, of being deemed broken by stress, paralyzes me. What if she takes the children? So I persist in my solitary watch, listening to the climb, the voices clarifying, the temperature plunging, the dust yielding its ghostly impressions, sensing a presence that has outgrown the stairs. The renovation nears its end. Another week, perhaps 2, the foreman estimates. I suspect our time is shorter. Every night until it's done, the voices promised. Done with what? Reaching their destination? Attaining their desire? or acquiring their target. I heard Maya crying softly last night, not in fear, but talking in her sleep. I don't want to climb the stairs. Please don't make me climb the stairs. Leo has sleepwalked thrice this week. I find him at the stair base, gazing into the upper darkness with no recollection upon waking. And Clara. Yesterday morning, I discovered her staring up the attic ladder, coffee cool and forgotten in her mug. When questioned, she murmured, "I thought I heard someone calling me, asking me to come up." So here I sit, bat, flashlight, notebook filled with impossible truths. The new floors gleam, the walls wear fresh paint, the scent of completion hangs in the air. Soon, we reclaim the upper floors, attempt normalcy. But I know the footsteps will resume, the voices will call, and someday soon, they won't merely pause at the landing. They will proceed, beckon, insist we join the ascent into whatever waits above. They're starting. Now, first step. Second, the nightly whispers commence. But tonight, a variation. Tonight, they are shaping a name. My name. Flight is the rational imperative. Grab my family, abandon this place. Yet my limbs are leaden. Beneath the terror, the bone-deep weariness, the screaming denial of reason, stirs a treacherous curiosity, a nascent understanding that perhaps, eventually, we all face those stairs. The footfalls draw closer, the voices sharpen, and tonight, I feel terrifyingly certain I will discover their destination. It wasn't the Stygian blackness, nor the reek of forgotten water that first snagged my awareness. It was the thrumming. A low, insistent vibration felt more in the teeth than heard, utterly alien to this subterranean realm. 15 years I'd plumbed the city's guts for the infrastructure collective. I knew the anatomy of these tunnels. No sanctioned machinery had breathed down here since the Carter administration. My lamp's beam sliced the dark. Wristwatch check, 14:47. The indifferent afternoon sun was a world away, 50 feet above the concrete skin of Ashworth. My boots churned the shallow, scummy water, the light carven shapes from the oppressive gloom. Ancient brickwork, weeping moisture, formed the tunnel's arch, hung with calcified tiers like grotesque chandeliers. The thrum intensified as I pushed deeper. Not loud, not yet menacing, but persistent. Imagine a colossal freezer working silently leagues away, its hum smoothed to an unnerving uniformity. My grip instinctively tightened on the heavy flashlight. Its beam snagged motion, just vermin, a rat of unsettling girth scurrying along the narrow service ledge flanking the wall. Thousands I'd seen, creatures born and dying in damp dark. This one felt significant. My phone confirmed the expected, no service. Protocol demanded half-hourly check-ins, but the battered comm unit clipped to my belt had offered only silence for the past hour. A press of the transmit button yielded a burst of angry static. "Dispatch, this is Reese. Position is sub-level D7, Old North Ward Network. Acknowledge." White noise answered. Again. "Dispatch, receiving. Over." Only the hiss of dead air replied. The thrum shifted, descending a semitone. Gooseflesh pebbled my arms. It wasn't directional anymore, not emanating from further down the passage. It was ambient, a resonance vibrating off the curved bricks, seeming to well up from the very earth beneath my feet. I swept the lamp in a slow circle, hunting for a source. Wires, conduits, anything. Nothing but century-old masonry and patches of velvety, lightless moss. I drew out my service tablet, navigating the digital blueprints. This artery of the drainage system, laid down in 1887, saw major surgery in 23 and 62. Post-Kennedy, only rudimentary upkeep. No power lines mapped, no substations, zero explanation for the sound pulsing through the tunnel. The tablet's display shimmered, pixels dissolving into momentary chaos before resolving. The battery icon plunged from 82% to 67% in the seconds I watched. I killed the power, stowing it quickly. Louder now, the thrum. My boots grated on unseen grit as I pivoted. Decision made. Surface. Report. Bring in the specialist. That's when the light appeared. Faint, ethereal blue, pulsing rhythmically from a side passage perhaps 20 feet ahead. It throbbed in time with the hum, a luminous, artificial heartbeat. I knew this section intimately. That opening had no right to exist. The water deepened as I neared the anomaly, rising over my ankles. My lamp beam revealed not familiar brick, but rough-hewn stone, walls that seemed to drink the light. The blue glow retreated subtly with my approach, a shy phantom hovering always at the periphery of illumination. The hum escalated, vibrating through my bones, rattling my teeth. My digital watch dissolved into flickering, meaningless segments, then died. The flashlight beam faltered, its clean white cone decaying into a jaundiced yellow. My backup light refused to wake. The phone remained inert, a useless brick. I stood at the threshold of the impossible passage, mesmerized by the pulsing cerulean light painting the stone with dancing shadows. The thrum filled my skull, a physical pressure. My heart hammered a frantic counterpoint. Every nerve ending screamed retreat. I took a step forward. The water, shockingly cold, bit through the thick rubber of my boots. Each footfall sent ripples across the surface, distorting the reflected blue into writhing, liquid sigils. The tunnel angled downwards, curving gently left. The air grew frigid. My breath plumed white before me. 50 feet in, the passage widened into a chamber, circular, perhaps 30 feet across. The ceiling soared into absolute darkness, far beyond the reach of my dying lamp. The blue luminescence seemed omnipresent now, sourceless yet pervasive. The hum was almost unbearable, a tangible force against my eardrums. From the chamber's center rose a column of metal unlike any substance I'd ever encountered. Not steel, not copper, something in between, its surface shifting, flowing like quicksilver caught in starlight. It vibrated, a perfect physical manifestation of the thrumming sound. Symbols, or perhaps characters, were etched into its fluid surface, glyphs that twisted the eye and blurred perception when focused upon. The water, pooled around its base, was different, clearer, deeper. And as I watched, paralyzed, something stirred beneath that crystalline surface. Something immense. My flashlight gave a final, pathetic flicker and died. The blue light intensified, its pulse accelerating. The hum climbed the scale, hitting a frequency that sent agony through my fillings. I tried to back away, stumbling, my feet suddenly leaden. The water resisted, thick as syrup. Then, a grip like frozen steel clamped around my ankle. I crashed backward into the frigid water. Not a hand. Worse, a tendril of liquid metal, identical to the column's substance, had coiled around my leg. Its strength was absolute, its cold a searing burn. I thrashed, kicking wildly, but more tendrils erupted from the depths, questing, purposeful. My scream was swallowed by the chamber's vastness as the first tendril tightened. The pressure was unbelievable. A sickening crack echoed, my ankle bone yielding. White-hot pain lanced up my leg. More tendrils snaked around my other leg, my arms, my torso, pinning me, drawing me inexorably toward the vibrating column. The blue light was blinding, the hum a physical roar that obliterated all other sensation. Through the glare, I glimpsed impossible movements in the water, shapes that defied geometry, angles that belonged to nightmare. Inch by agonizing inch, they dragged me closer. My flailing hand brushed the comm unit still clipped to my belt, a final, desperate act. I ripped it free, thumb jamming the transmit button. Instead of static, a piercing, high-frequency whine screamed from the speaker. Instantly, the tendrils recoiled as if struck, their grip vanishing. I scrambled backward, crab crawling through the water until my back hit the cold stone of the chamber wall. The radio's shriek intensified, and the column began to shudder violently. Cracks fissured its mercurial surface, bleeding more liquid metal into the pool. The blue light strobed erratically. The hum fractured, turning discordant, enraged. The chamber began to tremble. Chunks of stone, detached from the unseen ceiling, plunging into the churning water around me. Using the wall for leverage, ignoring the shattered ankle, I hauled myself upright. The radio was scorching hot, searing my palm, but I clung to it. I shuffled along the wall toward the tunnel mouth. The column was visibly degrading, pieces dissolving into the roiling pool. The blue light pulsed like a dying star, casting frantic shadows that seemed to possess malevolent life. More tendrils surged from the water, but they kept their distance from the radio's sonic assault. The ceiling was collapsing. I half ran, half limped back up the impossible tunnel, fighting the rising tide. Agony spiked from my ankle with every movement. Behind me, the sound of something colossal breaking free, a wet, tearing sound that promised annihilation. I didn't look back. The tunnel felt impossibly long. The water surged higher, nearing my waist. The radio grew unbearable, blistering my hand. I dropped it into the flood just as I stumbled back into the main drainage tunnel. The whine ceased abruptly. The hum died. Silence, absolute and terrifying, descended for a heartbeat. Then a new sound, rushing water but distorted, wrong, and rapidly approaching. Adrenaline surged, erasing the pain. I ran, splashing frantically through the main tunnel, eyes fixed on the section markers stenciled on the wall, D7, D6, D5. The sound behind me swelled, a liquid avalanche with a purpose. Something struck my back, a blow that stole my breath. I staggered but kept moving. D4, D3, light ahead, blessed, mundane surface light filtering through a manhole grating. Still 100 yards, my lungs burned. My legs were concrete stumps. The presence behind me was a physical weight, pressing closer. More impacts. My back, legs, head. Not water. Globules of that quicksilver metal, burning like dry ice where they struck. I shook them off, pushed harder. 50 yards. The light beckoned. 20. The ladder rungs gleamed. 10. Something coiled around my broken ankle again. A raw scream tore from my throat as I kicked backward blindly, my boot connecting with yielding solidity. The grip released. 5 yards. Ladder. My hands found the cold iron. My arms, screaming with exhaustion, hauled me upward. Below, the water churned, phosphorescent. I climbed faster than I knew possible. Reaching the top, I threw my weight against the heavy manhole cover, shoving it aside. Sunlight struck my face like a physical blow. I dragged myself onto the pavement, rolling clear the opening. Horns blared, voices shouted, irrelevant noise. A geyser erupted from the manhole, not water, but the liquid metal itself, clawing toward the sky. It hung suspended for a moment, twisting into geometries that defied natural law. Then the direct sunlight hit it. The metal instantly sublimated, vanishing into a fine shimmering mist that dissipated in seconds. The geyser collapsed back into the depths. With a final, definitive clang, the manhole cover slid back into place, seemingly of its own accord. I lay on the sidewalk, gasping, soaked in water that steamed slightly in the afternoon heat. My ankle throbbed with nauseating intensity. Small, precise burns patterned my back and legs where the metal had touched me. A crowd gathered, faces blurred with concern, someone calling for help. I couldn't speak. My gaze was locked on the manhole cover. It looked utterly normal. Just another iron disc set into the asphalt, indistinguishable from thousands across Ashworth. But I could still feel it. The thrumming. Fainter now. Subterranean. Almost subliminal. But undeniably there, vibrating up through the concrete, through the soles of my remaining boot, into my bones. Waiting. The ambulance arrived 15 minutes later. Paramedics documented severe hypothermia despite the 85-degree air, third-degree cold burns in startlingly perfect circles across my back, and an ankle fractured in 3 distinct places. They noted trace amounts of an unidentifiable metallic substance clinging to my hair and clothing. Those samples disappeared from the city laboratory 3 days later. My resignation from the infrastructure collective was tendered the following morning. They accepted it without comment, sealing the records of my final inspection tour. Structural instability became the official reason for condemning that section of the North Ward drainage system. Sometimes, late at night, when the city exhales into quietude, I press my ear to the floorboards, listening. The thrumming persists, a deep pulse moving through the earth beneath the streets, subtly strengthening, drawing nearer. I know what resides in the deep places now. I know what waits in the ancient, dripping darkness, growing, spreading through the old tunnels like invasive roots. And I know, with chilling certainty, that someday the interference, the static shriek, won't be enough. The next time it reaches for the surface, it will not relinquish its grasp. Nobody believes the fragmented story I offer. How could they? It's just infrastructure, isn't it? Just 100-year-old brick tunnels and storm drains. Nothing more. If you are reading this, give the manholes in the North Ward a wide berth. Avoid the gutters after a heavy rain. And should you ever perceive a low, persistent humming rising from the ground beneath your feet, run. Run without hesitation, as far and as fast as your legs will carry you, because it remembers Reese, and now it knows you're listening. Even now, the memory constricts my chest. The frantic cadence my heart adopted in the dead hours within that sprawling ancestral house. I'd lie rigid in bed, my gaze fixed on the shadowed topography of the ceiling, ears straining against the silence, deciphering each groan of the ancient timbers. My parents, lost to slumber elsewhere in the labyrinthine structure, offered no buffer. Generations of my blood had resided here, yet the knowledge never eased the disquiet. It only seemed to deepen the shadows. Night after night, phenomena defied explanation. A breathy susurrus slithering just behind the wallpaper, a solitary, resonant thud reverberating from the cellar's depths. My jaw would lock, my breath catch. I desperately sought mundane culprits, the sighing wind, the groaning pipes, but a colder certainty resided deep within, whispering that the truth was far less simple. My formative years were spent within that edifice on the town's fringe. Voluminous, it boasted 2 levels and a seldom visited attic space. Its entrance, an obstinate slab of heavy timber, protested with a drawn-out creak at every arrival and departure. The windows, tall and austere, wore antique frames that bled drafts onto the floorboards on frigid nights, chilling currents snaking unseen across the rooms. My father's attempts to seal these breaches proved futile. Always a faint, deliberate breeze seemed to navigate the corridors. Near the entrance lay the living room, dominated by a lengthy divan and a coffee table bearing the scars of time on its chipped edges. The wallpaper, faded and sallow near the ceiling, seemed to weep history. A single overhead bulb dispensed an anemic light, painting the corners in deeper shades of gloom. Beyond, a hallway bled into the dining room, presided over by a substantial wooden table and a chandelier thick with dust, prone to a spectral sway when gales assaulted the house. From there, one entered the kitchen, surprisingly capacious, a repository for generations of culinary tools, time-worn utensils, pans burnished dark with use, hulking pots. Open shelves lined the walls above cabinets of somber wood. Beneath foot, ceramic tiles amplified every footfall into a series of sharp, echoing taps. The rear door gave onto a modest yard, centered by a solitary, gnarled tree, and guarded by a gate succumbing to rust. Beyond this boundary lay only an expanse of untamed grass stretching toward the horizon. My own chamber resided directly above this kitchen on the upper floor. Consequently, any clatter of dropped utensil or percussive slam of a door below resonated through my floorboards with startling clarity. My bed faced the window, and on nights pierced by moonlight, the skeletal silhouette of the yard tree was etched against the glass. The remainder of the second story comprised elongated corridors branching off to spare rooms and the floor's sole bathroom. Doors here possessed a willful nature, shifting in their frames with any sudden draft, often discovered swung ajar in the morning light, though I held no memory of leaving them so. But the nocturnal acoustics were the true torment. Footfalls ascending the stairs, those aged wooden treads that groaned under any weight. My parents' steps were familiar signatures. My father's heavier, measured, my mother's a quicker, lighter passage. Yet sometimes, deep in the night's velvet, a different cadence emerged. The planks would squeal with agonizing slowness, as if under immense, careful pressure. Breath held captive in my lungs, I would wait for the ascent to conclude. Often, it never reached the landing. It would begin, climb halfway, pause with agonizing deliberation, then resume its climb into nothing. No subsequent door creaked open, no throat cleared, no sigh escaped. Just the meticulous climb, step by measured step, dissolving into profound silence. Then there were the whispers, embedded within the very walls. Perhaps I'd be attempting to read in the living room's weak glow, or letting the television's drone fill the space, when a faint disturbance would prick my awareness. Not words, precisely, but a continuous, sibilant murmur, like clandestine conversation muffled by plaster. Rising, I'd press my ear flat against the cool surface. The sound remained elusive, indistinct, yet undeniably present, intimate as breath on the other side. Sometimes, seeking a rational source, I'd rap my knuckles against the wall, a test for rattling pipes, but the act only amplified my unease, sending a peculiar tingle racing across my scalp. The cellar, accessible via concrete steps behind the kitchen, brooded behind a door tucked beside the refrigerator, secured by a flimsy lock that offered little true barrier. One night, the silence shattered around 2 or 3 in the morning. I stood at the kitchen sink, fetching water, when a violent thump erupted from below, a concussion that seemed to shudder through the very tiles under my feet. My muscles seized, my hand clenched, frozen around the glass. I felt my heart batter in my ribs, a frantic prisoner. Retrieving a flashlight from the counter, I crept to the cellar door, pressing my ear against the wood. Silence at first, then a faint shuffling, the dry scrape of something heavy being dragged across the concrete floor. A primal urge warred with stark terror, the desire to wrench open the door, to pierce the darkness with the flashlight's beam. I couldn't. Sweat slicked my palms and gooseflesh prickled my arms. Eventually, the dragging sound ceased. I retreated, backing away from the door into the relative safety of the kitchen's dim light. One of the most viscerally disturbing incidents involved the forks. Wakened near midnight, drawn by a craving for a snack, I flipped on the kitchen light. My gaze snagged on the silverware drawer, slightly ajar, not wide open, but enough to reveal its contents, or lack thereof. Every single fork we owned lay scattered across the tile floor, arranged with unsettling precision in a near-perfect circle. A jolt, cold and sharp, shot through me. My stomach lurched. I knew, with chilling certainty, that no one else was awake. I'd just passed my parents' room, the sound of my father snoring a steady rhythm in the quiet house. I stooped, picking up a single fork. It felt ordinary, cool metal against my skin, but the sight of them, laid out like artifacts in some obscure ritual, induced a wave of nausea. I gathered them methodically, returning them to the drawer, yet I couldn't dislodge the sickening conviction that some unseen hand had deliberately performed this bizarre tableau. My attempts to articulate these occurrences to my parents were met with gentle dismissal. Old houses settle, they'd say. The wind plays tricks, rattling loose hinges until cabinets swing open. Perhaps, they suggested kindly, I'd been half dreaming about the forks. But I knew the clarity of my awakened senses. I knew the distinct character of the sounds I heard. Most nights became vigils, spent sweating beneath the sheets, straining to hear those phantom footsteps on the stairs, bracing for the next inexplicable noise to rupture the stillness. The threshold of 18 marked my breaking point. I packed my existence into cardboard boxes and departed the following day, offering no grand farewell to the house itself, just leaving. I found refuge in a cramped city apartment financed by savings from weekend toil. It was small, confined, yet it felt blessedly secure. Here, the only nocturnal footsteps belonged to upstairs neighbors. The only whispers were their muffled arguments through the ceiling, mundane, manageable intrusions. Yet the house clung to me, an indelible residue. Dreams became its new domain. I'd find myself navigating its shadowed hallways, the floorboards groaning beneath my spectral feet, my limbs leaden, paralyzed. Waking abruptly, heart hammering, drenched in sweat, I'd stare at the unfamiliar ceiling of my apartment, breathing raggedly. The phantom echo of whispers seemed to linger in my ears. Minutes would pass before my pulse slowed, before rational thought could reassert itself. I'd rise, drink water, pace the small space, touching the solid, ordinary walls as if seeking tactile proof of my escape. Months after my departure, I returned for dinner. My parents remained, anchored to the place. My mother served a simple meal in the familiar dining room. Nothing had changed. The dusty chandelier, the weary wallpaper, the pervasive scent of age and stillness. Midway through the meal, a distinct creak echoed from the stairwell. My mother's fork paused fractionally. Her gaze flickered towards me before she resumed eating, a mask of normalcy firmly in place. My father appeared worn, as though the endless battle against the house's decay had finally exhausted him. He mumbled something about the property's age, the ceaseless repairs. I merely nodded. Later, lingering in the living room, I found myself hyper-aware of every minute sound. The old couch sighed beneath my weight. Wind rattled a window pane. When a faint, whisper-like sigh emanated from the wall, I forced myself to attribute it to the breeze. I made my excuses and left earlier than intended. The lie about early work a thin veil over the truth. The familiar tension was coiling tight in my spine once more. Sleep offered intermittent sanctuary. Sometimes I'd jolt awake, convinced I'd heard a thump from my own living room, only to find everything undisturbed upon investigation. Gradually, I realized I was reacting to any sudden noise with disproportionate alarm. The refrigerator's hum became the ominous thrum behind the cellar door. The building's plumbing morphed into those insidious whispers. The memory of the house, it seemed, had become a phantom limb, an ache in a place I no longer inhabited. There were nights I sat huddled in bed, knees drawn to my chest, whispering affirmations of my current safety, trying to convince my own trembling body that it couldn't reach me here. At 20, I drove past the house, a single, impulsive detour. Parking across the street, I simply observed it. The front yard was surrendering to weeds. The exterior paint looked even more spectral and bleached by time. The windows seemed like vacant eyes, dark and unreflecting. Then I noticed it. An upstairs curtain pulled slightly aside, creating a narrow gap. as if someone or something was peering out. A cold fist clenched in my gut. The distance obscured any detail. It could have been imagination's cruel trick. Sweat beaded on my forehead. My hands tightened on the steering wheel, muscles bunching in my arms. After only a few minutes, the oppressive weight of just looking became unbearable, and I drove away. The dreams persisted, sometimes escalating in intensity. I'd be traversing the upstairs corridor only to hear a door creak open slowly behind me. Spinning around, I'd confront only impenetrable darkness. Then, the jolt awake, heart pounding, shirt clinging damply. One night, the dream transported me back to the kitchen floor, meticulously gathering the scattered forks. In this iteration, they felt strangely sticky, and an unnerving sensation prickled the back of my neck, the feeling of breath, cold and unseen. I woke gasping, fumbling for the light switch, banishing the shadows. Sleep did not reclaim me that night. I sought refuge in activity, burying myself in work, taking extra shifts, staying out late with friends, deliberately avoiding the old neighborhood. But in moments of stillness, the memories would surface, unbidden. The cellar door looming, the silverware drawer sliding open, the inescapable, suffocating dread. A sense of foolishness sometimes washed over me. I was safe now, miles away. Yet my body remembered, reacting with tremors and a racing pulse as if I were still within those walls. Eventually, I spoke with my mother again. She admitted, quietly, that my father, too, heard inexplicable noises in the deep night. Sometimes he would rise, investigate, but invariably found nothing. They'd contemplated moving, she confessed, but the weight of family history, the generations tethered to that plot of land, held them fast. I offered no argument, understanding their complex attachment, yet simultaneously recoiling at the thought of ever spending another night under that roof. Over time, I learned to construct a fragile peace. I began to consciously overlay the memories with rationalizations. The noises were merely the groans of old timber, the house settling on its foundations, the whispers, drafts whistling through hidden cavities in the walls, the forks, perhaps a warped drawer, a vibrational anomaly. I built a narrative of plausible deniability, yet a core part of me remained unconvinced, remembering the palpable presence felt while gathering those forks, the unnerving deliberation in the stairwell footsteps that led nowhere tangible. The memory of that specific visceral tension lodged in my chest never truly faded. People occasionally inquire if I believe in the spectral, the supernatural. My answer is always hesitant, inconclusive. I don't know. I only know the texture of my experience growing up in that house. I offer no embellishments, no theoretical frameworks. I simply state that things occurred there which defied my comprehension. Things that instilled a fear that was profoundly real, physically manifest. Hands that shook uncontrollably, a mouth gone instantly dry, a mind racing with unanswerable questions. Even now, years removed, those dreams still ambush my sleep, and sometimes, in the quiet aftermath of waking, I fancy I hear the faint creak of a floorboard in my own apartment. I find myself walking to the kitchen, compelled to check the silverware drawer, half expecting the gleam of metal scattered across the floor. It's always empty, the kitchen still and silent. Yet the relief is tainted. Sweat still prickles my brow, my stomach still twists into a familiar knot. I take a deep breath, anchor myself in the present, the distance, and return to bed. In the enveloping darkness, my thoughts inevitably drift back to those corridors, those whispers, those inexplicable footsteps ascending into silence. I consciously wrestle my focus toward the mundane. Work deadlines, weekend plans. Eventually, sleep returns, carrying the quiet hope that the house will remain confined to memory, at least for a little while. The thought of confrontation has surfaced, spending a night there again, perhaps, to face the source of the sounds, to prove their harmlessness. But each time the notion arises, the familiar constriction tightens my chest. I picture myself lying in that old bedroom, the wind sighing through the corridors and the suffocating certainty of not being alone, despite the absence of any visible presence, floods back. The decision is always the same. No, the potential cost of reawakening that primal fear is too high. My parents endure there. The house they maintain is too deeply woven into their history to abandon. I visit, confining my stays to the daylight hours. They never press me to remain overnight, a silent understanding passing between us for which I am grateful. We share dinner, converse in the living room's faded light, and then I depart. Walking towards my car, I invariably feel the house at my back, a silent, watchful presence that makes the hairs on my neck prickle. The last thing I ever want is to hear those stairs begin their slow, deliberate creak while I am within reach. To this day, the experiences remain an enigma, unresolved. I can only attest to their reality, their lasting imprint. If I close my eyes, even now, I can summon the sound, that slow, careful tread on the wooden steps. I can visualize the walls that seem to breathe whispers. I can recall the musty, subterranean scent of the cellar, feel the cold shock of the kitchen tiles beneath my bare feet as I stared down at that circle of forks. What it all meant, I cannot say. I only know that the house and the symphony of its unsettling sounds never truly relinquished its hold. I fled at 18, and my visits remain brief incursions. I respect my parents' choice, their rootedness, but my own chapter within those walls is irrevocably closed. It remains a landscape in my past, yet one that persistently bleeds into the geography of my dreams. And each morning I wake in my own quiet room, free of strange shadows and inexplicably open drawers. I feel a profound, fragile gratitude. It's all I ever truly sought, a life where the night promises rest, not a strained listening for the next tremor of the unexplained. Still, the memories persist. They always will. The moment remains etched, crystalline, pulling up to the gaunt edifice clinging precariously to the cliff's raw edge. I killed the engine of my workhorse van, the silence instantly replaced by the Atlantic's ceaseless roar, buffeting my face as I stepped onto the cracked flagstones. High above, the mansion hunched, its windows like vacant eyes reflecting the bruised gray sky. The great oak doors sealed as if against judgment. A palpable stillness radiated from it, an expectant hush that prickled the skin. I lingered, absorbing the decay, the fractured walkway snaking towards the entrance, the paint peeling from weathered clapboards like sunburnt skin. My commission was stark: resurrect an antique pianoforte, mute for uncounted seasons. Elias Thorne, tuner of dormant instruments, accustomed to hushed chambers. Yet this silence felt different, heavier, weighted. The front door groaned open under my push, a protesting sigh that echoed down the cavernous hallway. Stale air, thick with the scent of dust and forgotten time, filled my lungs. I lowered my canvas tool satchel to the parquet floor, its thud swallowed by the vastness. My gaze swept the foyer. A grand staircase spiraled upwards into shadow, flanked by towering closed doors. Ancestral portraits, their subjects obscured by grime and faded varnish, regarded me from the walls with indifferent hauteur. My focus, however, remained tethered to the task. A name, a number, my liaison, should the work conclude swiftly. Decades, he'd said, since the house knew inhabitants, yet the proprietors, eager to sell, desired the piano functional, a potential lure for buyers. I located the instrument in a capacious drawing room at the corridor's terminus. Tall windows framed a dramatic vista of waves detonating against the jagged rocks far below. There it sat, shrouded in a heavy dust sheet, withdrawn into a corner. Beneath the grime, the casework showed scars, old wounds in the dark wood, but a preliminary glance inside revealed strings remarkably preserved. I lifted the fallboard. The keys, yellowed ivory, bore the patina of age. The hammers displayed wear, certainly, but nothing terminal. Instinctively, I depressed a middle C, then a triad, anticipating a discordant clang, a muffled thud, anything, nothing. Utter, absolute silence, as if the keys were phantom limbs pressing upon dead air. No vibration trembled through the frame, no resonance lingered. I checked the strings again, taut, correctly seated. The hammers rose and fell with perfect mechanical grace. Logic dictated sound. Reality offered a vacuum. I rapped the side panel with my knuckles. A solid, dull thump answered, dispelling notions of rot or hollowness. The sustain pedal moved smoothly underfoot. With more conviction, I struck a full chord. Stillness profound. It was then the first tendrils of genuine disquiet wrapped around me. The pianoforte presented no discernible flaw, no physical impediment to voice. Why this profound muteness? Unfurling my tools, I commenced the ritual. Tuning pins turned, action screws tightened, felt hammers inspected. Methodically, I addressed each note, chromatically ascending from the growling bass to the crystalline treble. My ear, trained to perceive the subtlest deviation in pitch, strained against a wall of impenetrable silence. The hammers danced, struck their appointed strings, yet elicited no audible response. I nudged them. They wobbled obediently. Futile. Fetching my diagnostic lamp, I probed every recess, every joint, every shadow within the instrument's belly. No obstructions, no telltale signs of moisture damage, no foreign bodies wedged within the intricate mechanism. I leaned back on the stool, rubbing tired eyes. I'd coaxed sound from far more derelict instruments, pianos ravaged by neglect and time, but never had I faced one so outwardly whole, yet so profoundly silent. A trip back to the van yielded more specialized implements, and on impulse, a small digital recorder. Perhaps subsonic frequencies beyond my range were being generated. I positioned the device near the harp, initiated recording, and depressed the keys once more. Silence. After a patient minute, I stopped the recording, played it back, Only the sibilance of my own breath and the distant, rhythmic sigh of the ocean registered. The urge to call my contact to report this baffling impasse warred with professional pride. There had to be something I'd missed, some hairline fracture, some obscure disconnection. Lifting the heavy lid, I scrutinized the cast-iron harp. Dusty, yes, but intact. The pins held firm. Each wire gleamed unbroken. I depressed a key, watching the hammer's swift arc, its precise impact on the corresponding string. It should have oscillated, blurred with vibration. It remained utterly, unnervingly still, as if the very physics of sound had been suspended within its frame. A clammy dampness slicked my palms. Hours bled together in that room, punctuated only by the rhythmic probing of tools, the silent descent of keys. The sun dipped below the horizon, leeching the light, until only the stark cone from the lamp I'd retrieved from the foyer illuminated the scene. The rest of the mansion dissolved into absolute blackness. Outside, the wind moaned around the eaves, and the ancient timbers of the house groaned like a slumbering beast. I rose, stretching cramped muscles, rotating stiff shoulders, a flicker of movement, peripheral, indistinct. I spun, flashlight beam stabbing the gloom. Only the piano, impassive in its corner. A nervous chuckle escaped me. Fatigue, surely. Focus, Thorn. I resolved to consolidate my tools, perhaps seek refuge in one of the upstairs bedrooms for a few hours. Then it happened. A brief, jagged cluster of tones shattered the quiet behind me. Dissonant, chaotic, like random notes struck with a clumsy fist. My heart leaped, a painful jolt against my ribs. I whirled, flashlight beam finding the keyboard instantly, motionless. The keys sat level, undisturbed. Swallowing hard against a suddenly dry throat, I approached cautiously. Everything appeared precisely as I'd left it. No evidence of recent pressure. Rationalizations flickered. Wind whistling down an unseen flue. A draft setting sympathetic vibrations. But the room lacked a fireplace, and the air hung still and heavy. I set the recorder running again, placed it carefully, pressed a few keys myself. Silence. Then, turning my back, I stood utterly still, listening with an intensity that strained my ears. Only the house settling, the wind's mournful cry. After several minutes, I retrieved the recorder, played back the file. My breathing, a faint electronic hiss, the distant sea. Nothing more. The dissonant chord existed only in my memory, yet its echo felt chillingly real. I lowered the fallboard, a decisive click in the silence. Sleep. I needed sleep. Gathering my essential tools, I retreated from the room. Upstairs, I found a bedroom overlooking the turbulent sea. The bed, draped in dust like a funeral shroud, seemed structurally sound. I brushed off the worst of it, unrolled my sleeping bag atop the ancient mattress, and set my phone alarm for dawn. Perhaps daylight would lend clarity, banish the unease. I woke stiff, the unsettling atmosphere clinging even in slumber. The phone's alarm shrilled into the pre-dawn gloom. 6 a.m. Rubbing the sleep from my eyes, I saw the first hints of gray light painting the ocean horizon. The house remained profoundly silent as I descended the creaking staircase. Back in the drawing room, the lamp I'd left burning was extinguished. Odd. I flicked the switch, it sprang back to life. Had I turned it off? The memory was hazy. As I neared the piano, a fresh jolt went through me. The fallboard was raised. I distinctly remembered closing it. Closer still, I saw them. Fingerprints. Multiple smudges, dark against the yellowed ivory, as if made by greasy or dirt-stained hands. My own palms began to sweat anew. I scanned the dusty floor. Only my footprints disturbed the smooth layer. Pulling out my phone, hands trembling slightly, I documented the prints. The camera captured them clearly. Gently, experimentally, I touched a marked key. Silence. With a clean cloth from my kit, I meticulously wiped the keys clean, then tried playing again. Still nothing. It was 6:30 a.m. My stomach rumbled. A brief foray into the kitchen yielded only empty cupboards and a lingering stale odor. I drank from the water bottle I'd brought and returned, inevitably, to the drawing room. The sensation of being watched intensified, a prickling awareness on the back of my neck, though the room remained empty. Mid-morning, I propped my phone on a small tripod, aimed it squarely at the keyboard, and started recording video. I walked audibly down the hall, positioning myself just out of sight but within earshot. 10 minutes stretched into an eternity of listening. Faint clicks, ambiguous, the house settling or something else. Then, unmistakably, a brief, tumbling sequence of notes, discordant and wrong. 5 seconds, perhaps less. My breath hitched. I waited a beat, then strode back into the room. The piano sat silent, unchanged. I stopped the recording, reviewed the footage. The video showed the static scene perfectly. The piano, the window, the dust motes dancing in the light. But the audio track held only my receding and returning footsteps, the faint rustle of my jacket. The anomalous notes were absent, vanished as if they'd never occurred. I replayed the segment again and again. Silence. On screen, the keys remained perfectly still throughout, yet I knew what I had heard. I stood frozen, staring at the impassive instrument. A chill traced its way up my spine. My mouth was desert dry, my pulse thudding in my ears. Drawn closer, I inspected the keys again. Fresh smudges, in the very spots I had just wiped clean. More spectral fingerprints. I wiped them away once more, pressed the keys. Silence. Lifting the lid, I checked the hammers, the dampers, all mechanically sound. My hands shook as I drew a tuning hammer from my satchel. I tapped a few strings directly, bypassing the action. A faint, tinny ring resulted, proof the strings themselves weren't inert. They responded to direct force. But the keys, nothing. I lost count of the cycles. Press, listen, check, despair. Finally, I straightened up, turned, took a single step away. Behind me, a wavering, uncertain note sounded, trailing off into something disturbingly like a low moan. It hung in the air for less than a second. My throat constricted. I spun back, wrenching the lid open again, desperate to catch the hammers vibrating, the strings quivering. Motionless, utterly still. Sweat beaded on my forehead, trickling into my eyes. Enough. I retreated outside, the salty air a welcome shock. Inside the van, I started the engine, the familiar rumble a small comfort. Part of me screamed to put the mansion in the rearview mirror and never look back. Another, the ingrained professional, felt the weight of the unfinished job. But this wasn't a standard malfunction. This wasn't mechanical. This was other. I cut the engine. Stepping back into the oppressive silence of the house felt like a defeat. But I needed a definitive reason for my failure to report to my contact. Evening descended again, swallowing the house in deeper shadow. I forced down a couple of dry energy bars, drank more water. The wind howled with renewed fury, and a penetrating cold seeped from the very walls. I brought my sleeping bag downstairs, settling near the piano. If nocturnal phenomena were occurring, I would witness them. I set the phone to record again, plugged into a portable charger, my heavy-duty flashlight within arm's reach. Hours drifted by in a state of drowsy vigilance. Then a mangled cord exploded into the room, jarring me fully awake. I scrambled up, flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. The piano keys. Several were depressed, seemingly at random, as if a phantom hand had just crashed down upon them. Slowly, sluggishly, one by one, they rose back to their resting position. I stood, heart hammering, aiming the phone, desperately trying to capture proof. The screen showed only the dark bulk of the piano, the glare of my flashlight reflecting off its polished surface. Reviewing the video yielded nothing but darkness and the sound of my own ragged breathing. No chord, no movement. But looking back at the piano itself, I saw them. New fingerprints. The same pattern of smudges, now higher up the keyboard, near the treble clef. I leaned closer, my breath catching. The shapes seemed elongated, the fingertips strangely wide. Holding my own hand beside them confirmed it. They were larger than mine. I didn't sleep again. The remainder of the night was a tense vigil. Sporadic, faint tones whispered from the piano whenever my attention strayed, ceasing the instant I looked. My shoulders burned with tension, my head throbbed. The house groaned and protested under the wind's assault, each creak a potential footstep, each rattle a prelude to manifestation. But nothing appeared, only dust, shadows, and the unnerving silence of the piano, punctuated by sounds that defied recording. Dawn broke gray and unwelcoming. Standing by the window, watching the churning sea below, my resolve solidified. Another night here was unthinkable. I packed my tools methodically. One last time, I wiped the keys clean. A futile gesture, perhaps, but I couldn't leave them marred. I would contact my liaison, report an intractable issue beyond mere mechanics. Let them find someone else, or let the cursed thing remain silent. My expertise had limits, and this lay far outside them. Before departing, I made a final circuit, extinguishing the lamp, closing doors against the drafts whistling through the ancient structure. Back in the foyer, poised to leave, one final sound reached me from the drawing room. A single, low note, rough-edged and resonant, like a bass string struck with brutal force. I didn't turn back. I didn't want to see the keys, didn't want to find fresh prints. I simply walked out, pulling the heavy door shut behind me. How to articulate the phenomenon of that pianoforte? I still lack the words. Every component, hammers, strings, pedals, keys, appeared functional, moved as designed, yet conspired in an inexplicable pact of silence when played by human hands. Yet, it spoke in dissonant whispers and broken chords when unwatched, unheard by any recording device. The smudges remain an enigma. The pervasive sense of a resentful presence lingers. Seeing the mansion shrink in my rearview mirror brought a profound, almost shameful relief. Reaching the main road felt like surfacing from deep, cold water. I vowed to report the instrument fundamentally sound, but afflicted by an insoluble problem. That silent piano haunts my thoughts still. Silence is my trade, the canvas upon which I work. But the silence in that cliffside mansion was of a different order entirely. Vast, watchful, and utterly wrong. I pray my work never leads me back to its door. No conscious design led me onto the phantom path. It materialized beside the familiar track, an unassuming fissure in the dense wall of green, less a trail than a suggestion whispered by the trees. I frequented this national park, knew its mapped arteries by heart, yet this deviation felt like discovering a hidden inscription on a well-read page. A flicker of impulse, perhaps the lure of the untrodden, the promise of solitude deeper than the designated routes allowed, tugged me forward. A moment's pause, surveying the shadowed invitation, and then my boots left the worn earth for the uncertain embrace of the woods. Instantly, the atmosphere shifted. The air grew not just cooler, but heavier, steeped in a silence that wasn't tranquil but taut, expectant. The nascent trail snaked between trees, crowding ever closer, their high boughs knitting together, starving the forest floor of sunlight. What little illumination penetrated arrived in long, wavering blades that sliced across the leaf mold, dancing eerily as the unseen breeze stirred the canopy. I pressed onward, anticipating a swift loop back or perhaps a dead end. But the way only burrowed deeper, swallowing the familiar world behind me. Initially, the seclusion was intoxicating, a secret pocket of wilderness, mine alone. The only accompaniment was the brittle percussion of my boots on desiccated leaves and the sighing rustle of branches overhead. Yet, after perhaps 20 minutes, the novelty curdled. The path showed no inclination to return me to known territory. No other soul disturbed this profound quiet. Then came the prickle, subtle as static, raising the hairs on my nape, the unnerving certainty of unseen scrutiny. I dismissed it as imagination, a byproduct of the profound isolation. But the deeper I ventured, the more insistent the feeling became, compelling frequent, nervous glances over my shoulder, my eyes probing the dense foliage for the source of this burgeoning anxiety. The trail dwindled further, threatening to dissolve entirely into the undergrowth. I halted, attempting to orient myself within the monotonous panorama. Towering, moss-clad trunks, a tangled carpet of fallen limbs and leaves. The main path was utterly lost to me now. No landmark offered guidance, no sense of distance traveled or direction maintained remained. That's when the sound reached me. A delicate disturbance in the leaves, a dry skittering, emanating from somewhere to my left. I froze, straining to hear past the frantic drumming in my own ears. It came again, louder, closer, the distinct sound of deliberate movement through the brush. My gaze swept the trees, finding only shifting shadows in the gentle sway of branches. Is anyone there? The words felt small, absorbed instantly by the vast, indifferent woods. Silence answered, absolute and unnerving. The skittering ceased. A difficult swallow. Shake it off. An animal, surely, a startled deer, a foraging squirrel. But a deeper instinct refuted the comforting thought. The sound had felt purposeful, observant. My hand sought my phone, for the time, for a GPS lifeline. Predictably, no service. The digital umbilical cord severed. The knowledge wasn't surprising this far off grid, but it amplified the rising tide of unease. Retreat seemed the only sane option. This clandestine path had to originate somewhere. Backtracking would surely lead me out. Or so the rationale went. I turned, forcing a measured pace that belied the urgency thrumming beneath my skin. Around me, the trees seemed to lean inward, their shadows lengthening, deepening into pools of ink. My focus narrowed to the ground, searching for the faint impression of my passage. But minutes later, a chilling realization dawned. The trail had vanished. I stopped dead, breath snagged in my throat. A slow, disbelieving rotation revealed nothing but unbroken forest floor. No path, no subtle indentation. It was simply gone, as if the woods had smoothed over my wake. Panic began its insidious crawl. Calm down, think. I must have missed a turn, stepped off the barely there track. It was overgrown, obscured, yet frantic searching yielded nothing. I was adrift. The rustling returned, sharp and immediate, directly behind me. I spun around, heart slamming against my ribs, eyes darting, frantic, finding only the dense, unwavering tapestry of the woods. Nothing. The pulse hammered in my ears. A cold film of sweat slicked my neck. "Hello?" My voice trembled this time. "Who's there?" Only silence responded, a profound void that prickled my skin. The sensation of being watched intensified, no longer a vague unease but a palpable presence lurking just beyond sight, patient, hidden amongst the trees. Waiting, staying was unthinkable. I plunged forward, choosing a direction based on gut feeling alone, feet pounding the loamy earth, trying desperately to retrace the memory of my steps. Trees blurred into a vertiginous smear of green and brown. Shadows writhed and stretched at the periphery of my vision, seeming to pace me. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs screamed, bursting finally into a small, unexpected clearing. I bent double, gasping, heart galloping, mind reeling. The rustling had ceased, but the silence offered no comfort. I remained profoundly lost, trapped in the heart of the woods. I straightened slowly, scanning the confines of the clearing. Hemmed in on all sides by the oppressive forest, it offered no clues. No sign of a path in or out. Utterly, terrifyingly lost. And then I saw it. Nestled at the far edge, half swallowed by shadow, stood a structure. A cabin. Ancient timbers, warped and silvered with age, walls bearded with moss, the roofline sagging vulnerably in the middle. No windows broke its weathered facade, only a single door hanging slightly ajar, swaying almost imperceptibly in a breeze I couldn't feel. Primal instinct screamed retreat. Every cautionary tale warned against such places. Yet some other force, desperation perhaps, or a sliver of hope for aid, drew me forward, my feet moving before conscious thought could intervene. The hinges groaned in protest as I pushed the door inward, the sound echoing unnaturally in the clearing stillness. Inside, dust lay thick as velvet on every surface. The air hung heavy, stale with disuse. Yet something felt discordant, fundamentally wrong. I stepped over the threshold, floorboards creaking beneath my weight. As my eyes adjusted to the gloom filtering through chinks in the walls, the cabin's meager contents resolved. A single room, a rough wooden table centerpiece, a few scattered chairs. But it was the object spread across the table that turned my blood to ice. A map, a detailed map of the park, its official trails meticulously rendered in red ink. And there, slashing through the known geography, stark and undeniable, was the unmarked trail, the phantom path I had taken, the path that shouldn't exist. I backed away, a tremor starting deep within me. Understanding eluded me, but the imperative was clear: flee. As I turned, the door slammed shut with a violent, definitive thump, plunging the cabin and me into absolute darkness. Solitude, I believed, was the silent companion of my late-night ambles. The deserted avenues, the vacant pavements, the low thrum of unseen automobiles, a symphony that cocooned me, suggesting the metropolis had drawn its curtains, leaving me adrift in a tranquil void. This quietude possessed a certain balm, a near comforting embrace. Yet, on that particular night, veering onto a lane previously untrodden, this solace fractured, yielding to an older, colder acquaintance: dread. My intention had been modest: a brief circuit through the familiar neighborhood grid to quiet the mind's chatter. Midnight loomed, or perhaps had already passed, the air sharpened by autumn's premonitory chill. Night walking appealed precisely for its stillness, the sensation of a world suspended, inhaling deeply before the dawn. Distractions dissolved. Only the percussion of my own soles on the concrete and the infrequent sigh of wind through slumbering foliage remained. Street lamps cast elongated, skeletal shadows, their luminescence fluttering weakly. Houses stood sentinel, lightless, their windows like closed eyes, inhabitants lost to dreams. A predictable tableau, this suburban expanse where quiescence was the norm. But tonight an undercurrent stirred, something dissonant. And then I saw it. A narrow fissure between two dwellings, an alleyway almost swallowed by shadow, conspicuously lacking the benediction of a street lamp. Trees lining its entrance stooped inward, their branches knitting into a dark archway, a maw leading into profound obscurity. A flicker of hesitation, a pull of perverse curiosity. It was merely another street, I reasoned, indistinguishable from countless others. Yet an unsettling quality clung to it. The air felt denser here, weighted, as though the darkness itself possessed a physical pressure. Prudence urged retreat, adherence to the known path. Instead, my feet propelled me forward, crossing the threshold into the unlit passage before conscious thought could intervene. Deeper I walked, and the world grew quieter still. The city's distant murmur evaporated entirely, leaving only the intake of my breath and the soft, gravelly bite of my shoes. Tall, antiquated houses flanked the way, their windows vacant, obsidian panes reflecting nothing. No glimmer of light, no hint of motion, no signifier of life. Only an insistent, prickling sensation, the feeling of being observed, as if the very architecture possessed unseen eyes studying me from the gloom. My pace involuntarily quickened, propelled by an unnamed urgency. The lane meandered, stretching longer than geometry allowed, twisting in defiance of the neighborhood's established layout. My internal compass, usually reliable, spun uselessly. This place felt aberrant, an unmapped insertion, conjured perhaps solely for my passage. That's when the sound began. Faint initially, a mere whisper on the air currents, a soft, rhythmic insistence, like a gentle rapping on aged wood. I halted, straining my ears, but its origin remained elusive, seeming to emanate from everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. A quick scan revealed nothing but the empty lane. Just a loose shutter, perhaps, I rationalized, or a gate creaking in the breeze. benign explanations. Yet, as I resumed walking, the tapping intensified. It was steady now, deliberate, falling into step just behind me, mirroring my own footfalls. Again, I stopped, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. Slowly, I pivoted, bracing for a confrontation with the shadow lurker. The lane behind me lay starkly empty. Silent houses, the narrow path receding into blackness. The tapping ceased the instant I did. I stood frozen, the silence amplifying my own ragged breathing, battling the rising conviction that I was not, in fact, alone. I forced myself onward, faster now. The tapping resumed, louder, more demanding. Panic tightened its icy grip as I escalated to a jog, breath tearing raggedly from my lungs. The houses flanking me smeared into indistinct shapes, their windows dark, dead eyes. Orientation abandoned me. I only knew escape, flight from the unseen companion dogging my heels. The lane contorted, the houses looming taller, more grotesque in the penumbral light, a disorienting sense that I was caught in a loop, a labyrinthine street folding back upon itself, ensnaring me. Then, perception snagged on something ahead. A figure, standing at the sidewalk's edge, barely discernible, a concentration of the prevailing darkness. Utterly still, unmoving, an observer cloaked in shadow. Details remained elusive. Just a tall, lean silhouette, head canted at an unnatural angle, a cold plummet in my gut. Every instinct shrieked reversal, retreat, but my limbs were leaden, volition severed. Rooted, I stared, mesmerized by the static presence. It offered no movement, no sound, simply waited. The tapping erupted anew, closer this time, sharp, immediate, as if right beside my ear. I whirled around, nothing, only the vacant street stretching back into the void. Turning back, heart hammering, I found the spot where the figure had stood empty. The sidewalk was clear, the houses resumed their silent vigil. No hesitation lingered. I fled, sprinting down the lane, lungs burning. The tapping pursued, a frantic echo in the night, accelerating, closing the distance, chasing me down. Ahead, the familiar orange halo of a street lamp promised sanctuary. The main road, the known world. I burst from the oppressive lane onto the illuminated thoroughfare, heart convulsing, legs trembling uncontrollably. The instant my feet hit the brightly lit pavement, the tapping vanished. I risked a backward glance. The narrow passage I'd emerged from seemed to have retracted into the shadows, erasing itself from the intersection as if it had never existed. I stood there a long while, gulping air, wrestling with the unreality of the preceding moments. No logical framework offered purchase. No reason could dispel the icy residue of fear. The street was gone. The figure dissolved, but the chill uncertainty of having been followed lingered. A phantom presence imprinted on my psyche. Nocturnal walks have since lost their appeal. For 3 years, this building had been merely a backdrop, unremarkable brick and mortar, until last autumn breathed a disquiet into its familiar bones. It was then that apartment 7B, nestled down the corridor, began to emanate a strangeness I couldn't ignore. Occupied, the whispers went, yet perpetually sealed. A threshold no one seemed to cross, inwards or out. Nights grew punctuated by sounds that defied easy explanation. The ponderous tread of heavy feet on bare floorboards, a laborious dragging noise, concussive thuds against shared walls and choked moans that bled into the hallway's hush. Denial was a tempting refuge, but the evidence mounted, insistent. I recall the specific evening it clawed its way to the forefront of my awareness. Returning from work, the clock hands nearing 11, a grate and scrape echoed near the lift. Furniture relocation, perhaps? My logical mind grasped at straws, but the hour was wrong. The timbre alien. Less wood on wood, more like rusted links pulled across stone. Stepping from the elevator cage, I stood suspended in the corridor's dim glow, listening. My heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs. My throat felt tight, parched. The overhead light, prone to fits, sputtered erratically, each flicker amplifying the tension coiling within me. I turned towards my own door, sanctuary beckoning, but the sound persisted, swelling momentarily before receding into a dragging murmur. Curiosity, tinged with apprehension, propelled me towards 7B's dark portal. Pressing an ear to the cool wood, I detected only a faint, low friction, something slithering across the floor within. A tremor started in my hands. I pressed the bell. Silence answered. Initially, I kept this burgeoning unease locked within. Voicing it felt like inviting ridicule, accusations of frayed nerves. So I tried to dismiss it, to overlay the ordinary onto the odd. Days later, however, around the vacant hour of midnight, the sounds returned. Ensconced in my living room, adrift in the flickering blue light of the television, that same dragging resonance snagged my attention. It felt unnervingly close, just beyond the plaster and studs separating my flat from the hallway. Then, a dull impact, heavy and final. My stomach clenched. Muting the television, I set down a remote, holding my breath, straining to hear. The thumping recurred, followed by a muffled groan, or perhaps a protracted sigh, difficult to parse, yet undeniably human in its strained timbre. Ghosts, spirits, such words felt clumsy, melodramatic. There had to be a rational explanation. A tenant, perhaps? Someone working nocturnal hours, burdened by some peculiar affliction? But the groans possessed a depth, a drawn-out quality that didn't sit right, that felt ancient. Rising, I moved to my own door, easing it open a fraction to peer into the vacant passage. Empty. The standard fluorescent lights cast their sterile wash over stillness. The silence felt heavy, almost a physical pressure. Then, faint but distinct, the scraping recommenced, as if a chain were being meticulously drawn across the floor inside 7B. I tiptoed closer, drawn by a morbid gravity, until I stood directly before the enigmatic door. The air here felt perceptibly colder, a localized pocket of chill despite the lack of any obvious draft. My fingers brushed the doorknob, the metal bit with an unexpected coldness. Locked tight. Should I knock? The thought barely formed before a sudden, violent thump from within sent me stumbling back, balance momentarily lost. My pulse roared in my ears. "Hello?" I managed, the word a weak tremor in the air. "Is anyone in there?" Only silence responded. I jabbed the bell again. Nothing. After 20 taut seconds suspended in that void, I retreated hastily to my own apartment, the click of my lock echoing unnervingly loud. Sleep offered little respite that night, haunted by the phantom drag of chains. A persistent wrongness had seeped under my skin, unsettling the very foundations of my home. The following morning, encountering Mr. Finch, The building superintendent in the lobby felt like an opportunity. "Morning," I began casually. "Just wondering who's in 7B these days." He offered a mildly perplexed frown. "Apartment 7B? That's Mr. Corbin," he stated matter-of-factly. I feigned nonchalance. "Ah, right. Has he ever mentioned any issues? Noises, perhaps?" Finch shook his head. "Mr. Corbin? Never a peep. Pays his rent, quiet as a mouse." He then pivoted the conversation to upcoming pipe maintenance, a clear deflection. I let it drop. The situation worsened about a week later. Returning from the supermarket, arms laden with groceries, I exited the lift into a hallway veiled in unusual dimness. An odor hung in the air, stale and earthy, reminiscent of damp cellars or disturbed soil. A quick scan revealed no spills, no obvious source. As I approached my own door, which sits adjacent to the mystery apartment, separated only by a seldom-used fire door, I heard it. A distinct creak from 7B, followed by a long, low moan that raised the hairs on my scalp. I froze mid-stride. The door to 7B was slightly ajar. I stared into the sliver of profound darkness it revealed. My mind fractured, one part scream in retreat, the other held captive by a morbid compulsion to see. Using the toe of my shoe, I nudged the door further open. Its hinges protested with a faint squeal. Inside, nothing. No furniture, no ambient light, just a cavernous living area defined by naked walls. The musty odor intensified, thick with the scent of stagnant air, of space long unvisited. The plastic grocery bags suddenly felt immensely heavy, yet my palms were slick with sweat. "Hello?" My voice was a thin thread swallowed by the emptiness. Silence. I ventured a few steps inside, the floorboards groaning under my weight. To the left, a small kitchen alcove, utterly barren. No appliances, no countertops, nothing. I glanced towards where bedrooms might lie. Their doors gaped open onto equally desolate rooms devoid of curtains, fixtures, or any sign of habitation. Boxes, clothes, a solitary lamp. I expected something. There was only void. Gooseflesh prickled my arms. The air inside was cold, heavy with a subtle dampness. An unnerving sense of being watched prickled at the edges of my perception, though only vacant walls met my gaze. I took another hesitant step. Then a soft thud emanated from one of the back rooms. Not loud, but undeniably close. I froze solid, breath catching in my throat. "Is someone there?" My question echoed, unanswered. Retreating carefully, I backed towards the entrance, then slipped out, pulling the door gently closed behind me. It clicked shut with quiet finality. My knees felt weak, unreliable. I hurried the few remaining steps to my own flat and secured the locks. After that intrusion, the feeling intensified. Something had followed me out. Late at night, traversing the hallway became an ordeal. A distinct sensation of presence would bloom behind me, a phantom breath on the nape of my neck. Soft, scraping footfalls seemed to shadow my own. My heart rate would spike. A frantic glance over my shoulder always revealed nothing but the empty, buzzing corridor. This happened repeatedly. Each time, my pace quickened, keys fumbling at the lock, until I was safely inside. Back pressed against the door, chest heaving, feeling as though I'd narrowly evaded something intangible yet menacing. One night, desperate for validation, for tangible proof that I wasn't unraveling, I ventured into the hallway armed with my phone. Standing near 7B's impassive facade, I hit record. The corridor hummed with its usual low electrical buzz, otherwise silent. I spoke softly into the microphone, noting the time, explaining my purpose, documenting the noises. For minutes, nothing. I began to feel foolish, exposed. Then, just as I considered abandoning the effort, it came. 3 distinct knocks, slow, deliberate, heavy, originating from inside apartment 7B. My mouth went instantly dry. I stared at the wood panel, phone trembling in my grip. "Hello?" I whispered. A faint scraping sound answered, then absolute silence fell once more. My hand shook so violently I nearly dropped the device. Opening the door wasn't even a consideration this time. I stopped the recording and fled back to my apartment. Listening later, the audio captured the 3 chilling knocks perfectly, though the scraping sound was absent. The knocks alone were enough to solidify my fear. Sleep became a forgotten luxury. Each night devolved into a tense vigil, waiting for the next inexplicable sound. Sometimes loud, sometimes barely audible, the noises were a constant reminder, fraying my nerves raw. I found myself compulsively checking the hallway through my peephole several times a night, half expecting to find 7B's door gaping open again. It always remained closed. Yet the feeling persisted, growing stronger, pressing against the very walls of the building, it seemed. A knot of anxiety resided permanently in my stomach. I became irritable, snapping at colleagues, dodging calls from friends, consumed by a stress I couldn't articulate. One morning, around 2, thirst pulled me from a restless doze. As I stood in my kitchen, glass in hand, a faint tapping sounded at my front door. So soft, I questioned if I'd imagined it. My heart leaped. Motionless in my own small hallway, I listened intently. Another gentle tap. Setting the water glass down with exaggerated care, I crept towards the door. The peephole, old and clouded, offered only distorted shapes, a shifting shadow lurking on the threshold. I held my breath, silent. I could have sworn I heard a whisper then, faint and sibilant, just beyond the wood, but the words were lost. Then, nothing. After a minute, stretched taut with anticipation, I slowly undid the latch and cracked the door open. The corridor stretched before me, empty, bathed in the usual sterile light, carrying that familiar faint, stale odor. No one. I secured the locks again. Sleep utterly banished for the remainder of the night. Moving felt like the only solution, yet my lease held me captive for months more. And what explanation could I offer? My neighbor's apparently empty apartment makes scary noises and feels haunted. I clung to the hope of rationality, but the stark emptiness I'd witnessed warred with Mr. Finch's insistence on a tenant named Corbin, a tenant never seen. The footsteps, the groans, the dragging, none of it aligned. Perhaps a week ago, another layer of strangeness unfolded. Walking towards my door after work, I noticed them. A trail of damp footprints on the tiled hallway floor. They originated near the elevator and led directly to the door of 7B. The outlines were distinct, suggesting a man's shoe larger than mine. Kneeling, I touched one print. It felt cool and damp, carrying that same musty, subterranean scent from inside the apartment. I scanned the ceiling and walls for leaks. Nothing. Following the prints, I saw they terminated abruptly at the threshold of 7B. Standing there, breathing shallowly, chest tight, I realized with a jolt of visceral dread that the door was, yet again, slightly ajar. A chill, distinct and invasive, crawled up my legs. I nudged the door open with my foot. It swung inwards without resistance. Inside, no footprints marred the bare floor. Only the familiar tableau of empty rooms steeped in shadow. I didn't enter this time. I let the door drift closed and hurried away, the sensation of being watched burning between my shoulder blades. That night, the presence felt amplified, palpable, as if it stood sentinel just outside my own door. Curled on my sofa, the television murmuring on low volume, only a small lamp pushing back the darkness, I found my gaze repeatedly drawn to the door, anticipating its handle turning, its frame swinging inward unbidden. My hands trembled uncontrollably. The fine hairs on my arms stood erect, a physiological response to a cold that wasn't physical, while sweat beaded on my forehead. Every mundane sound became magnified, menacing. The groan of settling pipes, the refrigerator's hum, a distant siren. Around 3 a.m, a soft scraping noise began at my door, delicate yet persistent, like fingernails tracing the wood grain. I shot upright, heart slamming against my ribs. The sound continued for several seconds, then ceased. I remained frozen on the couch, breath held captive in my chest, until the first gray hints of dawn filtered through the window. The next day, I cornered Mr. Finch again. He became immediately defensive. Mr. Corbin pays his rent on time, Alara. There's no problem with 7B. Had he seen inside recently? I pressed. He shrugged, muttering something about tenant privacy, his discomfort palpable. I retreated, defeated, the knot in my stomach tightening. A reckless urge flickered, to force the door, to confront whatever lay within. But fear held me back, a primal terror of what truths that emptiness might contain. Now, the walk down the corridor is a gauntlet run daily. The feeling of being followed is constant, a tangible pressure, a cool draft skimming the back of my neck that makes my chest constrict. My pace quickens, keys fumbling, the urge to slam my door shut upon entry overwhelming. Sometimes I do, leaning against the wood, straining to hear footsteps retreating, or worse, waiting. Occasionally, a soft sound rewards my vigil, the brush of fabric against the door, a faint, drawn-out moan. Seconds later, silence returns, leaving me breathless, heart pounding, whispering reassurances to myself in the perceived safety of my locked apartment. A few nights passed. Sleep was shattered by a violent thump next door, powerful enough to vibrate the shared wall. Panic seized me. Throwing on clothes, I burst into the hallway. Empty. The door to 7B stood closed, impassive. Heart hammering in my throat, sweat trickling down my temples, I stood rooted, listening. A dragging sound commenced within, then the distinct clank of what sounded horrifyingly like a chain hitting the floor. My chest felt impossibly tight. What the hell is this? The words escaped me, thin and reedy. Driven by a surge of desperate frustration, I struck the door once, hard. Silence. Then, a second, deafening thump from the other side threw me back physically. A shockwave felt deep in my bones. I scrambled back to my flat, slammed the door, slid to the floor, leaning heavily against it. I remained there for what felt like an hour, body rigid, mind trapped in a terrifying loop. Sleep was unthinkable. This is my reality now. Perpetually on edge, sleep-starved, dread a constant companion. Every creak in the building, every whisper of wind funnels into the narrative of 7B. Returning home fills me with a nauseating anxiety. My routine is dictated by avoidance, by minimizing time spent in that haunted corridor. My focus phrase: concentration is a luxury I can no longer afford. In the quiet moments, the sounds return unbidden to my mind's ear. The dragging chain, the ponderous steps, the muffled agony. The image of those bare, cold rooms I glimpsed surfaces, stark against Finch's insistence on the phantom Mr. Corbin. Leaving is no longer a thought. It's a necessity. The relentless anxiety, the profound lack of rest, the insidious feeling of being pursued by something unseen, it's eroding me. Nights spent bolt upright in bed, convinced movement stirs just outside my door, imagining the knob turning, the chain dragging ever closer down the hall. My chest seizes, my skin grows clammy. I reach for my phone, but who could possibly understand? Friends would offer sympathy, perhaps suggest therapy. Maybe they'd be right. But the sounds are real. The door is real. The presence is undeniable. I'm counting the days until my lease expires. Each approach to my apartment feels fraught with peril. Keys clutched tight, a desperate sprint, the satisfying thud of the deadbolt sliding home. A ritual performed before the unseen can close the distance. Sometimes I still press my ear to the wood, listening to the faint stirrings next door, wondering if it is right there, inches away, listening back. I don't use the peephole anymore. The fear of meeting an inhuman gaze on the other side is too great. I just have to endure, hold myself together long enough to pack my life into boxes and escape this place. Until then, I exist with the suffocating certainty that I am not alone here, that something watches, waits, and inhabits the emptiness next door. An emptiness that is never truly empty.